The chair scraped softly against the floor as I sat down, careful not to move my arm. My daughter didn't look at me when she spoke, only said very calmly, "He taught you a lesson." The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than shouting. It was late winter,
Did you remember
the kind
to
that
call
keeps
the
the house dim
landlord
even
about
at
the
noon.
heating?
We were sitting at the old dining table, the one with
left a
scratches from years of
message.
ordinary
He hasn't
meals and
gotten
small
back to me
arguments.
yet.
My arm was wrapped in a sling I hadn't explained yet, and no one asked. I told myself it was just another family dinner, but something in the stillness said this moment would not pass quietly. I sat down slowly, the way you do when your body asks for permission first. The chair complained under my weight, a thin sound, like it remembered me better than I remembered it. I kept my arm close to my side and waited for the pain to settle into something manageable. The room didn't rush me. It just watched. The table was already set, plates spaced evenly, forks lined like they were meant to behave. My daughter stood at the stove with her back to me, stirring soup that had already been warmed once before. The house held the cold the way old houses do, letting it linger even when the heat is on. A thin line of air slipped through the cracked window near the sink, carrying the smell of winter and something metallic. I pulled my sweater tighter without meaning to. No one asked if I was comfortable. No one asked why I was late. We had reached that quiet understanding where questions felt heavier than answers. She carried the pot to the table carefully, both hands wrapped around it, her steps measured. She set it down in the center, then went back for bowls. She didn't look at me.
Indeed.
Not once.
A very
Her eyes
fine
stayed busy with the
texture.
small, necessary
And the
tasks,
weather has
ladle,
been
spoon, napkin.
exceptionally
Things you can do
temperate.
without thinking,
Yes,
things
quite
that don't ask
agreeable.
anything back.
The
I
lighting
watched her
in
the way
this
mothers
room
do,
is quite
noticing the
optimal,
slope of her
isn't it?
shoulders, the
Yes,
tightness at her
it
jaw.
provides
She had learned how to
excellent
move like this from
visibility.
someone,
Yeah.
from years
A
of
very
choosing the careful way through a
standardized
room. The soup
illumination.
steamed gently, fogging the air between us. Chicken and noodles. The kind I used to make when she was sick, when she'd sit on the counter swinging her legs and tell me about school. Tonight, it tasted like something left unfinished. We sat down across from each other, the table wide enough to feel like distance. Someone said grace out of habit. I bowed my head and closed my eyes, but the words slid past me without landing. Conversation came in pieces. The weather, a neighbor's new car, something on the news that no one really watched. Our voices sounded polite, almost careful, like we were guests in our own house. I nodded when I was supposed to. I smiled when it felt expected. My arm throbbed quietly, keeping time with the clock on the wall. Every few seconds, I felt it pulse, reminding me I was still here, reminding me I hadn't imagined it. My daughter ate slowly, too slowly. She kept glancing toward the hallway, toward the dark space where the
Are
bedrooms
you
were.
prepared
Each
to
time she
tell me
did,
the
her
truth
hand paused
about
in
what
midair,
happened
spoon
here?
hovering. It was the same look she used to give the front door when she was younger, waiting for someone to come home, counting footsteps that never arrived on time. I followed her gaze once, then looked away.
What happened
The hallway
to your
stayed
arm?
empty. It always did. I shifted in my chair,
What
and the wood
happened
creaked
to your
again.
arm?
The sound felt too loud. My daughter's eyes flicked to me, then away, like she'd touched something hot. She cleared her throat and asked if the soup was warm enough. I told her it was fine. Everything was fine. That was the word we used when we didn't want to open something we couldn't close again. I rested my hand
I
on the
should have
table,
been more
careful with my
careful.
movements. The sling was visible now, the white fabric stark against the dark wood. I hadn't planned on explaining it tonight. I hadn't planned on much of anything. Still, the silence leaned toward it, curious, waiting. I could feel the question in the room even before anyone spoke it. She didn't ask. Not then. Instead, she folded her napkin with unnecessary care, pressing each crease flat. I watched her hands, how steady they
I
were,
should have
how
been
practiced.
more careful.
Those hands had once reached for mine without hesitation. Now they stayed close to her plate, self-contained. I wondered when the shift had happened. Not all at once. It never does. It's small moments that pile up. Words swallowed. Doors closed quietly. Lessons learned without being taught. I took a breath and felt the ache spread up my arm, into my shoulder. It was the kind of pain that doesn't shout.
There is no
It just
need
stays.
for confusion.
Someone laughed softly at something unimportant.
Everything
It
functions
sounded wrong in the
according
room,
to the
like
plan.
laughter often does when it's meant to fill
If
space
everyone
instead of share
adheres to
joy.
the
My daughter
guidelines-
smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She glanced down the hallway again, longer this time, like she was checking the time on a clock only she could see. I felt a strange weight settle in my chest. Not fear exactly. More like the sense you get
He
when you
taught
realize
you
you're
a
already late for
lesson.
something, and you don't know what it is yet. I pressed my lips together and kept eating, even though I wasn't hungry. The soup cooled in my bowl, untouched after a while. The chair held me. The table stayed solid. The house didn't fall apart. Still, something felt off, like a picture hung just slightly crooked. I had the sudden, quiet thought that sitting down had been a mistake. Not because of the pain, because of what it meant, because of what it allowed. My daughter finally looked at me then, just for a second. Her eyes were unreadable, guarded. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. The moment passed. The hallway stayed empty. The soup steamed less. I sat there with my arm held close, listening to the house breathe, and wondered why it felt like I'd already been judged. Like the lesson had started before I ever took my seat. The question came quietly, almost politely, the way people ask things they're not sure they want answered. What happened to your arm? It was spoken from the other side of the table, not my daughter's voice, but it felt like it belonged to her all the same. I looked down at the sling first, as if seeing it for the first time might help me decide what story it deserved. The fabric was already creased where my fingers had been worrying it, white against everything else that had gone dull with age. I took a breath that stayed too long in my chest. "Oh," I said. I slipped, took a little fall. Nothing serious. The words sounded practiced, even though I hadn't practiced them. They landed gently, like something set down instead of dropped. I kept my voice light, almost careless, the way you do when you don't want the room to rearrange itself around the truth. No one challenged me. No one leaned in. But my daughter's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. The soup rippled once, then settled. Her fingers tightened, slow and deliberate, until her knuckles went clear. I noticed because I always notice things like that. I noticed the way her jaw set, the way her shoulders lifted just a fraction, like she was bracing against a cold draft that only she could feel. She didn't look at me. That was what stayed with me most. If she had corrected me, I would have known where we stood. If she had sighed in relief, I might have believed the lie myself. Instead, she stayed very still, eyes fixed on her bowl, as if the surface of the soup held something important she couldn't afford to miss. The room waited. There's a kind of silence that feels polite, and another that feels heavy. This one pressed down on the table, on the plates, on my arm resting too carefully in my lap. The clock kept ticking, louder than it had any right to be. Somewhere in the house, the heat clicked on and off, trying to keep up with the winter. I shifted in my chair, and pain flared sharp enough to make my breath hitch. I swallowed it back. I always had. My daughter's spoon scraped softly against the bowl, a small sound that felt too loud. I wondered what she was waiting for. Not the truth, exactly. Not yet. Something else. A choice, maybe. An acknowledgement. A moment where I would look up and say more than what was safe. When I didn't, she exhaled through her nose, slow and controlled, like she was steadying herself. "It must have been a bad fall," someone said kindly. "Those things sneak up on you." I nodded, smiled, let the sentence pass without comment. Bad falls do sneak up on you.
That doesn't mean
so do
you're
bad
wrong.
silences. I remembered teaching her once how to tell when a storm was coming. We stood on the porch years ago, watching the trees shift in a wind you couldn't feel yet. I told her to watch the birds. They always know first. She was small then, holding my hand, trusting what I said. Now she watched me the way people watch the sky when they already know it's going to rain. She finally looked up, just for a moment. Our eyes met, and something unspoken moved between us. Not anger, not fear, recognition. Like she was checking to see if I was still the person she remembered. I wasn't sure anymore. I should have been more careful, I added too quickly. The words felt unnecessary as soon as they left my mouth. An offering no one had asked for. Her fingers tightened again. Careful. That word had been living in our house for a long time. Be careful what you say. Be careful how you move. Be careful not to upset anyone. I had taught her that too, without meaning to. She set her spoon down and folded her hands in front of her, palms pressed together like she was holding something fragile between them. She still didn't speak. I felt the lie settle into the room, heavy now, no longer gentle. Lies do that if you leave them alone too long. They start asking for space. My arm throbbed again, a dull ache that felt less like pain and more like memory. I remembered the sound before the fall, the quiet before it, the way the air had changed. I pushed the thought aside and focused on the table, the grain of the wood worn smooth where generations had rested their hands. This table had heard a lot. Arguments whispered late at night. Apologies spoken into empty rooms. It knew when people meant what they said and when they didn't. I wondered what it thought of me now. My daughter's eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to me. There was something there, expectation maybe, or warning, as if she were standing at the edge of something and waiting to see if I would step forward or turn away. I realized then that the question about my arm hadn't really been about my arm at all. It was an invitation. Say it, the silence seemed to say. Say what you've been carrying. Say it before someone else does. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The moment passed. The clock kept ticking. Someone reached for the bread. My daughter looked down, disappointment moving across her face so quickly it almost escaped notice. Almost. She picked up her spoon again, but her hand shook just enough for me to see it. I told myself there would be another time. Another question. Another chance to tell the truth when it wouldn't hurt so much. But even as I thought it, I knew that wasn't how these things worked. The lie stayed where it was, stretched thin between us, waiting. And my daughter kept eating, slow and quiet, like she was listening for something I hadn't said yet. The heater clicked on and off like it couldn't decide whether to stay. The light above the table hummed faintly, the bulb old enough to flicker without apology. I remember watching the steam lift from my bowl and disappear before it reached my face. Everything in that room seemed to fade quietly, as if it didn't want to interrupt what was coming. We were talking about nothing. That's what it felt like. Grocery prices. A neighbor's dog. Something someone had misplaced and later found exactly where it always was. Ordinary words, carefully spaced. I nodded at the right moments. I kept my arm close, tucked in, as if it were something private I hadn't decided how to introduce yet. Then my daughter spoke. He said you'd understand after the lesson. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't hesitate. The sentence slid into the space between us like it belonged there, like it had been waiting its turn. Her tone was even, almost calm. Practiced. As if she'd said those words before, maybe not out loud, but enough times in her head that they no longer surprised her. The word lesson landed hard. It didn't echo. It didn't need to. It sat there, cold and exact, resting between the plates and the silverware, pressing down on the table like a weight you don't notice until you try to move it. No one asked who she meant. No one needed to. The room knew. I knew. I felt heat rush up my neck and into my face, sharp and sudden. Not pain. Not anger. Something smaller and worse. Shame, maybe. Or the feeling you get when you realize someone has been talking about you in a language you don't speak, and you've just caught the end of it. I looked at my daughter. She was watching her bowl again, eyes lowered, spoon resting against the rim. Her hands were steady. Too steady. I searched her face for doubt, for discomfort, for anything that looked like she wasn't sure. I didn't find it. Lesson, I repeated quietly, more to myself than to anyone else. She nodded once. Just once. A small movement, like confirming the weather. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things no one wanted to touch. The clock kept ticking. The heater clicked again. Someone cleared their throat and didn't say anything afterward. The house seemed to lean in, listening the way it always did when voices went low. I thought about all the lessons I'd learned in my life. How to keep the peace. How to apologize first, even when I wasn't sure what I'd done. How to make space for other people's moods. None of them had ever left marks you could see. None of them had required a sling. I could feel my arm throbbing now, a slow, steady ache that matched my breathing. I pressed my lips together and tried to steady myself. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to raise my voice. I didn't want to give the word more power than it already had. What kind of lesson? I asked. The question came out softer than I expected. Almost careful. I wasn't sure who I was being careful for. My daughter hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Then she shrugged, small and contained. You know, she said. About pushing too much. About not listening. I felt something in my chest shift. Not break. Shift. I had spent years believing that if I stayed quiet long enough, the noise would pass. That if I softened myself, the sharp edges would dull on their own. Somewhere along the way, that belief had been handed down like advice. Like protection. Like love. I looked at my daughter's hands again. They were folded now, fingers interlaced, resting on the table. The same hands that used to reach for mine without thinking. The same hands I had taught to be gentle. And you believe that? I asked. She didn't answer right away. When she finally looked up, her eyes met mine without flinching. I think, she said slowly, that sometimes people don't hear you unless you make them. The words were quiet, reasonable, almost kind. That was what hurt the most. I realized then that she didn't see the lesson as punishment. She saw it as correction, as something necessary, something earned. I wondered how long she had been carrying that idea, who had helped her shape it, who had named it for her. I felt the heat in my face fade, replaced by something colder and steadier. Understanding, maybe. Or clarity. No one spoke after that. There was nothing left that could be said without changing the shape of the night. I pushed my bowl away, appetite gone, and rested my good hand on the table. The wood was cool under my palm, familiar. Solid. I wanted to tell her that lessons built this way don't teach what people think they do. I wanted to tell her that fear doesn't make things clearer, only quieter. I wanted to tell her a lot of things. Instead, I nodded. She looked relieved then. Not happy. Relieved. As if my acceptance had smoothed something over. As if the room could breathe again now that the word had been spoken and left unchallenged. I sat there, listening to the house settle back into its usual sounds. Plates shifting. Chairs moving. The night pressing against the windows. The word lesson stayed with me, sharp and cold, long after the conversation moved on. And as I stood to leave the table, careful of my arm, I wondered what she thought had been corrected, and what she hadn't learned at all. The light in the room softened without anyone touching it. Evening does that, moves in quietly, taking color with it. I remember staring at the edge of the table, where the wood had been rubbed smooth by years of hands resting, gripping, letting go. The voices around me grew distant, like they were coming from another room, another time. My arm ached, steady and dull, but it wasn't what held my attention. It was the way memory had begun to surface, uninvited, pulling at me the way tide pulls at loose stones. I saw old arguments first. Not the loud ones, those never lasted. It was the small disagreements that faded too quickly, the ones brushed aside before they could finish forming. A look that went unanswered. A sentence stopped halfway. I had been good at ending things early. Good at saying, it's fine, even when it wasn't. I thought that was what peace looked like. I thought silence was strength, something you carried so others wouldn't have to. My daughter's voice drifted back in. She was talking now, explaining things carefully, as if she'd gone over the words beforehand. Each sentence arrived measured, reasonable. She said he hadn't meant harm, that he was frustrated, that he was only trying to help. She said I could be difficult sometimes, stubborn without realizing it. She said correction wasn't cruelty if it came from love. I watched her mouth move as she spoke. The way her lips tightened at certain words. The way her eyes avoided mine, drifting instead to the table, the wall, anywhere else. She sounded calm. Confident. Like someone repeating a lesson they'd learned well. I remembered the first time I chose quiet over truth. I was younger then, tired, convinced that keeping the peace mattered more than being right. I told myself it was temporary. That next time, I'd speak up. Next time came and went. So did the one after that. Silence has a way of settling in, like furniture you stop noticing once it's been there long enough. My daughter kept talking. He didn't mean it the way it sounds, she said. He just wanted you to listen. Listen. The word pressed into me harder than anything else she'd said. I had spent years listening. Listening for shifts in tone. Listening for footsteps in the hallway. Listening for the right moment to speak, and then letting it pass. I wondered when listening had stopped being enough. I shifted slightly, the sling tugging at my shoulder. Pain flickered sharp and brief. I didn't react. I was used to not reacting. The habit sat deep in my bones. Her justifications kept coming, filling the space I wasn't taking. She spoke of intentions, of misunderstandings, of how things escalate when people don't feel heard. She spoke as if she were explaining weather patterns, something natural and unavoidable. I realized then how much she sounded like someone else. Not in voice. In cadence. In certainty. That realization settled slowly, heavy as snow. I thought about the apologies that never came. The ones I waited for, and then stopped expecting. I thought about how often I told myself it wasn't worth reopening something already closed. About how many times I chose harmony because it seemed kinder than conflict. Kinder to everyone but myself. My daughter paused, watching me now, searching my face for agreement. For relief. For something that would tell her she was right. I thought, she said quietly. I thought he was trying to help. I nodded. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. I know, I said. I used to think that too. The words weren't accusation. They didn't need to be. The truth had done its work already. It had rearranged the room without raising its voice. She covered her mouth with one hand, the other dropping to the table. I saw her breathing change, quick and shallow. She looked suddenly younger, the way she did when she was overwhelmed and didn't yet know which emotion to choose. I didn't reach for her. I stayed where I was. This wasn't a moment for comfort. It was a moment for clarity. "No one moves," someone whispered, though I couldn't say who. Or maybe it was just a thought passing through the room. My daughter lowered her hand and met my eyes again. The certainty she'd worn earlier was gone now, replaced by something unguarded and unsure. Silence wrapped around us, thick but not cruel. For the first time all evening, it didn't feel like a weapon. "I didn't see it," she said. Her voice cracked then, just slightly. I felt it in my chest. "That doesn't mean you're wrong," I told her. "It means you're learning." She nodded, tears finally slipping free, tracing quiet lines down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, like she was allowing herself to feel the weight of what had been named. Around us, the house seemed to exhale. The light above the table flickered once, then steadied. The clock began ticking again, or maybe it always had. Time, it seemed, was willing to move forward now. I rested my good hand on the table and felt the familiar grain beneath my palm. Solid. Real. I thought about all the lessons I had accepted without question, all the silences I had mistaken for peace. Naming this one didn't erase what had happened. It didn't fix everything, but it changed who carried it. My daughter reached out then, stopping just short of my hand, as if asking permission without words. I nodded. She took my fingers gently, careful of my arm, her grip light and unsure. The touch felt different now. Not protective. Honest. We sat like that for a while, the truth between us no longer sharp. Just present. Later, as I stood to leave the table, I moved slowly, mindful of my arm, mindful of myself. The room felt altered, not broken. Rearranged. I glanced back at my daughter. She was watching me, her face thoughtful, heavy with what comes after understanding. The lesson had been named. Now, the question wasn't what it had taught me. It was who would carry it forward, and who would never be allowed to teach it again.